They told me I should be grateful for the guest room. The one with no windows, no curtains, just an old mattress on a metal frame where the dog used to sleep before he died, and they didn't bother replacing him. They said I was just here for a while, like I was an unexpected package that got dropped off without instructions. My name wasn't on the mailbox anymore, and no one asked if I preferred tea or coffee. They talked about knocking down walls and building a second floor while I sat at the table, invisible. They laughed in front of me, forgot to include me in dinner plans, and spoke louder when I didn't respond fast enough. But while they picked tile samples and argued over paint colors, I was doing my own quiet measuring of time, of space, of what they'd taken from me. I traced their footsteps, listened to their careless whispers, and folded every slight into a plan. I smiled when they left me alone for weekends. I memorized account numbers while dusting their shelves. They thought I was done, thought I was lucky just to have a roof. But that roof? It was mine once, long before they put me under it like storage. And they thought I'd go quietly slip away with my little box of keepsakes and nod goodbye. But I didn't pack. I didn't tiptoe. I didn't warn them. I took the whole house with me. After my husband died, the house felt too quiet, too big, but I stayed. Not for comfort, for memory. His jacket still hung behind the door. His slippers stayed beside the bed until I couldn't take the sight of them anymore. I didn't grieve loud. I just worked. 2 jobs, one in the mornings folding shirts at the department store, another in the evenings helping clean offices where no one looked me in the eye. I kept the lights on, paid the mortgage, cooked small meals I never finished. I saved every dollar I could. There were no vacations, no new dresses, just what was needed, and then less than that. When my son said he found a place he loved, but the bank needed a little more to trust him, I didn't hesitate. I co-signed. I didn't even ask for the paperwork to be explained, just handed over my signature like a mother's blessing. I baked him a pie the day he got the keys. He barely looked up from his phone, said thanks with his mouth full, and left the plate in the sink. I washed it and told myself he was just busy. He had a new wife then, one who called me Ma when people were around, and her when they weren't. I tried not to mind. I gave them space. I gave them time. I gave them everything I knew how to give. When the market crashed and his job went with it, they showed up at my door with 2 duffel bags and a toddler in tears. She said it was just until they got back on their feet. I didn't flinch. I opened the guest room, moved my sewing machine to the hallway, and stocked the fridge. I watched their little boy color on my kitchen table. I cut sandwiches into stars and sang lullabies again, with a voice that hadn't been used in years. I ironed his work shirts when he found part-time shifts. I watched her take long naps in the afternoons while I folded their laundry. I never said a word. I didn't count the days. Because family isn't a calendar, it's forever. Or at least, that's what I believed. As months passed, they began rearranging things small at first. My teacups moved to the garage shelf. The curtains replaced with gray ones she said were more modern. Then my bedroom became the nursery. They said it was only fair since I was the only one not working. I took the sofa for a while, then the guest room, then just the corner near the pantry when her mother came to visit for a month that turned into 3. I didn't cry. I just folded up my quilt and waited for her to finish her tea in the mornings before I sat down. I didn't ask for much, just to keep my chair. The one with the little floral cushion I'd restitched 3 times. When I came home one day and found it by the curb with a free sign taped to the arm, I just stood there a while. Then I picked it up and carried it back inside. She laughed, said I was being sentimental. He said, "Mom, let it go." So I did. Or I pretended to. Holidays came and went. I was told where to sit, what not to bring, when to speak. They thanked me when it was convenient, called me strong when they needed something. But they never saw me. Not really. I was the extra place setting. The quiet sigh behind closed doors. The old coat they didn't want to wear but didn't have the heart to throw away. But through it all, I loved them. I brought home cookies I thought the little one would like. I stitched curtains with their initials. I left light on in the hallway for them when they got in late. Every piece of myself was tucked into the seams of that house. My hands built that home. My laughter had once filled it. My grief had soaked into its floorboards. My hope was painted into its walls. I gave them the roof. I gave them the walls. I gave them the keys. And I believed in my heart. I truly believed that someday they'd see it. That love would circle back. That maybe they'd say, "Thanks for everything, Mom. We couldn't have done this without you." But that moment never came. The more I gave, the more invisible I became. And the quieter I got, the more they mistook it for weakness. I didn't know then what I know now. That some people will build their lives on top of you and never once look down. They'll call it generosity. Call it grace. Call it family. But really, it's just forgetting. Forgetting who laid the first brick. Who paid the first bill. Who stayed when no one else did. I gave them everything. Everything I had. Everything I was. And all they gave me was the guest room. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing about being pushed out of your own life. It comes in inches, not miles. At first, it was just small things I brushed off. My room, the one they called the guest room, started to feel less like mine and more like a borrowed space. One morning, I went to close the door and realized it wasn't there. They'd taken it off the hinges without a word. "For airflow," he said, waving it off. "It gets stuffy back there." But it hadn't been stuffy before, and I hadn't said a word about the air. Then came the group chats. I'd hear them laugh from the kitchen while their phones buzzed. When I asked what was so funny, she said, "Oh, it's just something in the family thread. I never saw my name on it. Not once. I thought maybe I'd been left out by accident, so I asked her once, just once, if I could be added. She looked surprised, like I'd asked for the moon. "Oh, it's mostly pictures of the baby," she said. "You don't need all those notifications." And that was that. My teacups disappeared next, the floral ones with the little cracks in the glaze. They'd followed me from our first apartment, to the first house, to this one. I found them wrapped in newspaper inside a donation box in the garage. When I held one up, she said, "Oh, those? I figured you weren't using them anymore." I was. Every night. But I nodded, and I placed the cup back in the box like it didn't matter. They joked more, too. Not in a cruel way, not loudly, not directly, but enough. When I got up slowly from the couch, he'd laugh and say, "Careful, Mom. Don't break a hip." She'd giggle when I asked how the remote worked and say, "You're so cute when you're confused." I wasn't confused. I was cautious. I was trying to keep up with a world that moved faster and left less room. But it didn't matter. They weren't laughing with me. They were laughing at the version of me they'd decided to see fragile, slow, fading. I tried to make myself useful. I offered to fold laundry, and she told me the detergent was too strong for my skin. I made soup, and he said they were doing keto now. I baked a pie, and it sat untouched until the crust went soft. So I stopped. I stopped offering. I stopped inserting myself. I stopped being seen. I started noticing little shifts, like how they always left for errands without asking if I needed anything, how the thermostat was always too low, and no one seemed to hear me mention the chill, how the baby stopped calling me grandma and started calling me her. I don't blame him. Kids follow tone, and the tone in that house had turned. She began talking about her space, more often what she wanted to do with the dining room, how the kitchen needed a new backsplash. When I gently reminded her that the mortgage still had my name on it, she laughed and said, "Of course, for now." That "for now" stuck with me. It wasn't just a phrase. It was a countdown. The worst part wasn't the boxes or the laughter or even the silences. It was the way I started apologizing for existing. I'd shuffle out of a room if someone needed it, lower my voice if the baby was napping, hold my breath when I heard them arguing, hoping it wasn't about me. I began to fold myself into corners, smaller and smaller, until I barely recognized the woman I'd once been. The woman who paid off a mortgage, who worked late shifts, who held this family together after it almost fell apart more than once. That woman still lived here, in this very house. But no one looked for her. One night, I stood in the hallway with a load of towels in my arms, waiting for the bathroom to free up. Their voices drifted through the baby monitor they'd left on. She was laughing. And he said, "She'll outlive us all, you know." And she replied, "Not if we keep feeding her that canned soup." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stood there, listening, as they joked about my longevity like it was a nuisance, a problem they couldn't fix with a trip to Home Depot. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, or what used to be a bed, now just a thin mattress on a squeaky frame, and stared at the wall. No photos, no calendar, not even a lamp I'd chosen. I thought about every birthday I'd baked for, every paycheck I'd stretched, every favor I'd granted, without being asked, and I thought, maybe they're tired, maybe I'm a bit much. That thought broke something in me. They made me feel like a visitor in the house I built, and I let them, for far too long. It was a Tuesday when I noticed the mail hadn't come. At first, I thought maybe it was just delayed. A holiday, a storm, some small reason. But then Wednesday came, and Thursday, and the box stayed empty. I asked if anyone else had seen the postman. She looked up from her laptop and said, "Oh, didn't we tell you? We had everything redirected. It's just simpler this way." Simpler for who? I wondered. Simpler for them, I guess, not having to hand me envelopes. Not having to pretend they remembered I still had a life beyond their hallway. They didn't offer a forwarding address. Didn't say where my pension stubs or health statements would be sent. Just a shrug. And the return to tapping keys. That same week, I overheard them talking about the deed. It was one of those hushed, late-night conversations that wasn't meant for thin walls. "It's better this way," she said. "Cleaner." He sighed. "We'll just say she signed it. She probably doesn't remember." I lay there under my quilt, the one my sister had stitched for my 50th birthday, and I listened to the sound of my life being erased between sips of red wine. When I checked the county records online a few days later, something I'd never had to do before I saw it. My name was gone, just theirs now, sole owners. The house I'd poured decades into, every wall painted, every doorknob tightened with my own two hands, wasn't mine anymore. Not on paper, not in spirit, not even in memory. Still, I stayed. What choice did I have? I folded the laundry. I swept the floor. I smiled at the baby, even when he forgot my name. But things shifted again, like the tide pulling back just enough to leave you stranded. They began making plans I wasn't part of, dinners I wasn't invited to. I'd hear the car leave, hear laughter drift down the driveway, and sit at the table alone with a plate I didn't bother to heat. When I asked once where they had gone, she frowned. "You never want to go anywhere, Mom," he added. "You always look so tired." Tired? I wasn't tired. I was invisible. They never asked if I could go. They just assumed I shouldn't. The lights in the hallway were changed to motion sensors. "Eco-friendly," she said. But they never flickered on fast enough for me, and more than once I stubbed my toe in the dark. My cane scraped along the baseboard like a forgotten violin. No one noticed. I checked the mailbox every morning. Even after I knew, even after the mail stopped, I'd step outside in my cardigan, slippers soft from overuse, and open that little metal door like maybe something would be there. A letter, a note, a mistake reversed. Nothing. Just cobwebs and air. Still, I checked. It was a ritual, not a hope. They told me the plumbing needed fixing, that the money from my account had helped with the contractor. My account, the one I'd been building for years. My safety net. My dignity. They said it had been merged. It made sense, she told me. One household, one budget. I never saw the receipts, never saw the leak, but I saw her new handbag. I saw the smart thermostat. I saw the baby's toys multiply in the living room while I counted pennies for my own shampoo. Once, I mentioned a charge on the statement I happened to glimpse, something I didn't recognize. He stiffened. She smiled too quickly. "You don't need to worry about that stuff, Mom. It's handled." I asked for a copy of the statements. They said the bank didn't send paper ones anymore. I asked for online access. She said it was too complicated. Too complicated. I raised a child through layoffs and medical bills. Balanced books with a pencil and calculator. And now, I was too complicated to be trusted with my own savings? There was a Sunday I remember it sharply, when I came downstairs wearing my good blouse. The one with the pearl buttons I only used on holidays. I smelled roast chicken, heard music. The dining room was full. Neighbors, friends, a little birthday banner in the back. It wasn't mine. No one looked up. No one noticed me standing in the doorway. I turned around, went back upstairs, and changed back into my sweater. No one asked where I'd gone. But later, she knocked gently on my door and said, "You missed dinner. We saved you a plate." I smiled, said thank you, closed the door. Didn't eat a bite. That was the day I knew for certain. I didn't live there anymore. I existed there, like an old fixture that no one could be bothered to remove. My name wasn't on the mailbox anymore, but I still checked it every morning. Because some part of me, the oldest part, still believed that someone, somewhere, remembered I lived there. That I mattered. That I belonged. But that belief was wearing thin. Like the seams on my cardigan. Like the skin on my hands. Like the patience I had left. It started with a notebook. Just a plain, spiral-bound thing I found in a drawer they hadn't yet reorganized. I tucked it under my pillow, careful not to crease the pages. At night, while the house murmured with their laughter and the hum of the dishwasher, I wrote, not stories, not feelings, just facts, dates, times, what was said, what was missing. When they stopped asking, when they started assuming, when the mailbox went empty, when my name disappeared, I wrote it all down in silence. No tears, no punctuation, just lines stacking up like bricks, one after another, building something I didn't yet have a name for. I found the old deed one afternoon while searching for a photo album they'd misplaced. It was in a manila envelope tucked behind my tax folders in the hallway cabinet, yellowed at the corners, creased down the middle. But there it was, me signature, bold and deliberate, next to his, my husband's, from the year we bought the house, before the paint, before the children, before they learned how to ignore the sound of my footsteps. I held it in my hands and felt something stir, something I hadn't felt in a long time, certainty. The next week, I called Grace. We hadn't spoken in years, not because of any falling out, just life and time. She'd been a paralegal for 30 years before retiring, and she always had a way of speaking that made you feel like you were sitting inside a truth you hadn't realized yet. I told her everything, in pieces, carefully, slowly. I didn't want pity. I just wanted facts. She listened. She didn't interrupt. When I told her about the deed, the accounts, the mail, she said, "You know that's illegal, right?" And I just stared at the receiver like it had grown wings. She offered to come over, said she still had contacts, still knew how to read between the lines of bad intentions. I didn't say yes right away. I needed time, not to decide, but to believe. To believe that I wasn't helpless, that I wasn't stupid, that maybe, just maybe, I still had leverage. The next few nights, I went back into my notebook and started organizing the chaos. Highlighted entries, circled words. I made a second list people they'd spoken to about the deed, changes in behavior, the way they handled my medications. I remembered everything, even the things I thought I'd forgotten, not because I had a perfect memory, but because I had been present, fully, completely. Even when they treated me like background noise, I stopped speaking as much during the day. Let them think I was fading again. Let them talk over me, around me. She said I was getting quieter, and he agreed, saying maybe it was time to think about assisted living options. I nodded, smiled faintly, wrote it down that night. The 3rd of April discussed putting me in a home. I was in the room. They didn't ask. Grace came on a Thursday, dressed in navy slacks and a sweater with tiny buttons. She looked older, but sharper, somehow. She brought files, a notepad, a glint in her eye that said, "I remember who you are." We sat at the dining table while they were out. She spread the documents like a poker hand, asked questions, took notes. I watched her work, and a piece of me that had curled into a corner began to unfurl. She explained what elder financial abuse looked like, what forged signatures meant, how verbal agreements could be challenged with the right kind of evidence. She looked me in the eye and said, "You still have standing. You're not gone. You're just quiet." And I felt it, like warmth in my chest, like breath coming back. From that day forward, I treated my silence like a weapon, a calm one, a steady one. I didn't argue when they took over the grocery shopping. I let them. I noted the purchases, the irregularities. I copied down dates and totals from receipts when no one was looking. When they laughed about me not knowing how to use the new thermostat, I smiled and jotted the insult in my book. I was no longer the shadow in the corner. I was the archivist of their undoing. I found the power of paper again, of my own handwriting, of every looped G and crossed T reclaiming space they thought they'd taken. I wasn't screaming. I wasn't slamming doors or throwing plates. That's not how women like me fight. We observe. We record. We build the scaffolding of justice slowly, with patience only age can teach. They buried me in noise. Constant talk. Decisions made over my head. Jokes whispered under breath. They thought that would break me, but it didn't. It just made me quieter, sharper, more exact. They buried me in noise. I found power in silence. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. It started with one signature mine. The real one. Not the forgery they'd scribbled into bank forms and title changes. Not the ghost of my name they'd used behind my back. My full signature, signed in quiet ink on official paper and filed where they couldn't touch it. Grace helped me draw it up. She knew the language, the filing windows, the way the law moved slowly but surely if you fed it truth. We didn't shout. We didn't warn them. We just submitted the documents and waited for the wheels to turn. They had erased me from the title, but not from history. The original deed me copy held weight. My husband and I had co-signed that mortgage. I had receipts from 30 years back, tax documents, utility bills in my name. I was still legally tethered to that house, no matter how much they pretended I wasn't. Grace filed a legal claim asserting my ownership and freezing any sale or refinancing attempts. Just like that, their grip loosened, even if they didn't know it yet. I requested my full bank records, not the ones she handed me like scraps, but the originals. I had to fight for access, verify my ID 3 times, but I got them. And they told a story clearer than anything I could say out loud. Transfers from my pension to their joint account, charges from furniture stores I'd never stepped foot in, donations I never made, monthly utilities that spiked even when I hadn't used the stove in weeks. Every line item was a breadcrumb, and I collected every one. When the summons came, I was sitting in the back garden with my tea. I heard the mailbox creak, and this time, I didn't flinch. She opened the envelope inside, read the words slowly, then faster, her lips moving without sound. He stormed in from the living room. "What is this?" he asked, waving the papers. "You don't understand how this works." But I did. I'd made myself understand. For months, I'd been learning the language of leverage, and now it was fluent in every line of that document. The court date was quiet, clinical. I sat beside Grace in a room that smelled like dust and cold air. They sat across from me, stiff, dressed too nicely for people who'd underestimated me so badly. Their lawyer tried charm first, then confusion, then pity. "She's elderly. She must have misremembered. It was all agreed upon verbally. There's no malice here, just misunderstanding. But my notebook was there. My documents were there. My memory was there clearer than they ever gave it credit for." The judge didn't look at me with pity. He looked at me with recognition, like he saw what I had done. I had endured. I had gathered. I had fought back. The ruling was swift. Elder financial abuse substantiated. Deed manipulation flagged. And because I was still listed on the original title, they had 2 choices: buy me out at full market value, or vacate within 90 days. They didn't speak to me afterward. Not in the hallway. Not in the parking lot. He looked stunned. She looked humiliated. Neither said goodbye. I walked out with Grace at my side, my shoulders square against the spring wind. I carried one suitcase. Just one. Inside were clothes, photographs, the notebook, and the original deed creased, but still mine. I didn't have to raise my voice. I didn't have to slam doors. I didn't have to curse their names. I had the law, my memories, and something more powerful than all of it: proof. I walked out with a suitcase and half the house in my name. They thought I'd fade, disappear like steam on a mirror. But I didn't vanish. I sharpened. I stood up, not with fire, but with paper, ink, and facts. And when the door closed behind me, I didn't cry. I didn't look back. I didn't wonder what they were thinking or if they were sorry. That part of me had gone quiet long ago. What I carried wasn't just a legal win. It was the return of my dignity, folded carefully beside my favorite blouse and my wedding ring. They never expected me to fight back. That was their first mistake. Assuming I wouldn't win, that was their last. The thing about revenge is, it doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need a scene. It just needs timing. And I had time, more than they ever gave me credit for. After the ruling, they thought I'd take the payout quietly. They assumed I'd let them keep the house, let them stay, finish their little dream project with new tile and glass railings, while I disappeared into some retirement community brochure. But I didn't want their buyout. I didn't want their apologies either. I wanted the house to remind them of me, not as the old woman in the back room, but as the wall they couldn't tear down. So I sold it. Not to them. Never to them. I listed my half with a small real estate attorney Grace recommended, someone quiet, meticulous, and unimpressed by pleasantries. A woman who'd seen too many families smile through fraud. She helped me draft the terms. When he called to offer a sum, a low one, insultingly low, she sent back the asking price. Firm, no negotiation. When they tried to delay, claiming they needed more time to secure funds, I initiated the sale. The buyer was a property investor. Young, cold-eyed, paid in cash. He didn't want to live there, just flip it, maybe turn it into a duplex. He walked through the place once, didn't comment on the half-finished backsplash or the garden she'd once begged me to water. He saw numbers. And the house, my house, was about to become someone else's asset. Legally, it triggered a forced sale of the whole property. If one party wants out and sells, the rest can't stay unless they match the deal. And they couldn't. Not fast enough. Not after all the money they'd funneled into appearances. They tried. Of course they tried. Panicked voicemails. A letter from their lawyer. Even a neighbor stopped me during my morning walk and said, "Your daughter's really upset. Are you sure about all this?" I smiled, said nothing, kept walking. The for sale sign went up on a Monday. I watched them hammer it into the yard from the bench across the street, beside the tree I planted with my husband before he passed. The same tree they wanted to cut down for better curb appeal. Their renovation stalled halfway. The paint samples were still taped to the siding. The new mailbox had been ordered but not installed. The upstairs bathroom had bare drywall where a vanity should have been. They didn't get to finish their vision. They didn't get to pretend. I never stepped foot inside again. Not after the court. Not even to gather the things they still had in the attic. Let it all go, Grace said. Let them wonder what mattered most to you. So I did. I left behind my rocking chair, my cookbook, the linen with the embroidered corners. But I took the deed. I took my name. I took back the story. They moved out the day before the buyer closed. U-Haul in the driveway. Furniture hastily wrapped. Faces tight with disbelief. I sat by my window and watched from my new apartment across the street. Smaller. Cleaner. Mine. I sipped tea from a chipped cup, not the old floral set, but one I bought for myself. No one made fun of it. They waved from the porch once. I didn't wave back. I didn't need to. My silence said enough. My absence filled more space than my presence ever did. And when the new owner changed the locks and posted the no trespassing sign, I smiled. They thought they could live in what I built without me. But houses remember. And so do I. The first voicemail came the morning after the sale closed. Her voice, tight and trembling, said she didn't know how things got so out of hand, that she never meant for it to go this far, that she hoped I was still willing to talk. I listened to the whole thing once. Then I deleted it. The second came that evening. Him, this time, just breathing for the first few seconds, then stumbling through a half apology peppered with excuses. It was never personal. We just didn't know how to handle things. We thought we were protecting you. That one I didn't even finish. I turned off the volume and let the silence settle over the room like a soft blanket. They'd finally found their words. But I wasn't interested in hearing them. They kept calling. For days. Weeks. The ringtones changed, but the message didn't. Sorry. surprised, scared. Not once had they checked if I was okay when they siphoned off my savings or erased my name from the title. But now that they were the ones scrambling now, suddenly I mattered. Funny how that works. One day you're a burden, a forgotten coat rack in the corner, and the next, you're the center of their panic. I let the phone ring. Even the extended family joined in. A cousin I hadn't heard from in 10 years left a message telling me, "Blood is thicker than contracts." An old neighbor texted to say he heard I did something drastic. My sister-in-law called and said I'd humiliated them and should have just handled it privately. I didn't reply. I didn't explain. If they wanted a version of events that painted me as the villain, I let them have it. Let them sit with their narratives. I had mine. And it was quieter, steadier, truer. I didn't keep away out of hatred. That would have required too much energy. No, what I felt was clarity. A beautiful, crystalline understanding of what peace looked like. It looked like mornings without voices talking over me. Like choosing my own music. Like leaving the kettle on a little longer, just because I could. My new place wasn't grand. 1 bedroom, an old fireplace, and creaky floors that talked to me at night. But it was mine. Every corner of it mine. No one told me where to put my slippers. No one rearranged the mugs or hid the sugar. I had space. I had silence. Some days I sat by the window and read. Some days I wrote letters to myself. Not out of loneliness, but out of love. A quiet, growing love for the woman who'd stopped begging to be heard and started listening to herself instead. I bought a plant. Then 2. Then 5. I watched them bloom in the sunlight they said I didn't need. There was one night when the phone rang again. I recognized the number. I even let it play. Her voice cracked near the end, she said. She still didn't understand how I could do something like this to family. I turned it off before she could say more. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I made chamomile tea and sat with the sound of the kettle, the sound of something gentle arriving, without anyone needing to ask for it. They told everyone I betrayed them. I let them. Let them invent stories where I was the villain. Let them host their pity parties in rooms I'd once vacuumed. I didn't correct the narrative, because I didn't owe anyone the truth anymore. I lived it. That was enough. Sometimes I walked past the house, just once a week or so. The porch light was always off now. The garden overgrown. The curtains drawn tight. I wondered if they were still arguing about what went wrong, still pointing fingers, without looking in mirrors. I never stayed long, just enough to remind myself I didn't live there anymore. That version of me didn't exist anymore. I had peace now. Not loud, not triumphant, just steady. Like breath, like a heartbeat, like the sound of a door closing without a slam. They called. I didn't pick up, and I didn't have to. The first time I laughed out loud in my new apartment, it startled me. It was a Thursday morning, and I'd burned the toast. Just a little. The smoke curled up toward the ceiling, and instead of rushing or apologizing to no one, I chuckled. It came from deep in my chest, from somewhere untouched by fear or shame. I stood there in my worn robe, holding a wooden spoon like a scepter, and laughed until my shoulders softened. That's when I realized I was home. Not just housed, not just sheltered. Home as in safe. Home as in me. It was quiet most days, but not the heavy silence I used to live in, the kind that choked. No, this was a generous quiet. A silence that asked nothing from me, that let me fill it on my own terms. Sometimes I painted. Nothing fancy. Just little still lifes. Lemons in a bowl. A cracked vase. The light across the windowsill at 3 p.m. I hadn't painted since my 20s. They used to say I should find a hobby, but what they really meant was something that wouldn't get in their way. Now, I dipped the brush in color just because I liked how it felt. On Sundays, I invited women from the building for tea. Not out of loneliness, but because I finally had a table worth gathering around. We didn't gossip. We told truths. One woman lost her sister to greed. Another had been written out of her son's wedding. We passed stories like sugar cubes, letting them dissolve into warm cups of understanding. There was laughter. There were nods. There were tears that didn't need comforting, only witnessing. And for the first time, I didn't sit at the edge of the room. I sat in the center. I stopped checking my phone. The screen no longer held power over me. If it rang, it rang. If it didn't, the world still turned. I stopped waiting to be invited to things: birthdays, barbecues, holiday dinners where I used to stand in the corner trying to be useful. Now, I made plans for myself. A bus ride to the museum. A slow walk through the market. A bouquet bought for no reason at all. I stopped justifying joy. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the window or the hallway mirror and pause. Not because I didn't recognize her, but because I finally did. There she was, chin lifted, eyes clear, laugh lines deeper, maybe, but earned. I smiled once and said aloud, "There you are?" Like greeting an old friend who'd just come home from war. Because that's what it had felt like. A quiet war. And I'd survived. The walls of this place weren't mine by blood or marriage. But they held me. They didn't question my movements or monitor my sleep. They didn't call me dramatic when I cried during a movie, or absent-minded when I forgot a name. They let me be soft. They let me be still. And in that stillness, I began to grow again. I bought a small lamp with a yellow shade, placed it by the window. Every night, I switched it on before the sun dipped low. Not for anyone else. Not to signal safety to some wandering child or partner. Just for me. A little light that waited without expectation. A quiet reminder. This is your space. You're allowed to be seen. This time, I left the light on for myself. No one told me to. No one expected it. No one will know what it meant. But I do. I had spent years being useful. Years making myself smaller, quieter, easier to dismiss. But I wasn't a burden. I was the backbone. The roof. The warmth in every room they laughed in. And when they forgot that, when they chose to see only the wrinkles, the slippers, the empty chair, I left. Not in anger, not in haste, but completely. I didn't go quietly. I went completely. It started with a letter. Just a plain envelope with soft, slanted handwriting. "I read your story," it said. I thought I was the only one. There wasn't a signature, only a return address from 3 towns over. Inside was a folded newspaper clipping my story. The court case, the sale. And then below it, a line scribbled in pencil. "Thank you for reminding me I'm not crazy or weak." I held that letter for a long time. Not because it surprised me, but because I knew exactly how it felt to live in silence for so long, and finally hear a voice echo yours. I found a small network online, a forum tucked away beneath all the noise. Women like me, not angry, not bitter, just tired of being erased. They called it a housing dignity circle, but it was more than that. It was a lifeline. Grandmothers sleeping in spare bedrooms stripped of locks, widows whose names had been accidentally removed from leases, retired school teachers being strongly encouraged to sign over assets for their own good. The stories weren't new, but we were finally telling them. I sent letters, not emails, real letters, handwritten, with ink that sometimes smudged when I got too emotional. I told them about the things I'd lost, but more importantly, about the things I reclaimed. I told them about the court papers, the quiet sale, the yellow lamp, about how I stopped apologizing for taking up space. I wrote, "You don't owe anyone your silence. You are not too old to matter." I sent one every week, folded them with care, slipped in a dried flower from my windowsill when I could. Sometimes I got letters back. Sometimes I didn't. But I knew they landed where they needed to. Once a month, I hosted a small circle at the local library. Just 6 chairs, tea in a thermos, a plate of cookies I baked myself. No formal speaker, just stories. We sat in that quiet room with its dusty corners and mismatched table legs, and we talked about what it meant to give everything and be forgotten, about how to read legal documents, about where to find free notaries. One woman brought her divorce papers. Another showed us the letter her son wrote when he asked her to move out. We held those papers like relics, not of pain, but of proof. Proof that we had endured, that we had every right to be heard. One of the women, Lila, had been living in her niece's basement. They called it a guest suite, but it didn't have windows, just like mine once didn't. She said, I thought I was being ungrateful. We all looked at her and said, "You were being erased." A month later, she moved into a senior co-op after we helped her file the paperwork. She brought her own chair to the next meeting, red velvet with gold buttons. She said, "If I'm going to sit, I'm going to sit properly." We all clapped. It spread, quietly but steadily. One woman told her sister, another called a cousin. We weren't marching. We weren't shouting in the streets, but we were changing things. One notarized form at a time. One landlord challenged. One woman who didn't sign over her house just because her son called it a safety precaution. We started calling ourselves the Second Bloom Society, not because we were starting over, but because we were blooming again, on our terms, at our pace. And no one could prune us back this time. I didn't set out to become anything more than free, but freedom has a way of echoing, of calling to the parts of others that have been silenced too long. We weren't starting a movement. We were picking up where we'd left ourselves. They thought we were just background noise, old women with soft voices and slower steps. But we were vines, and vines find a way, through cracks, over walls, around locks. We weren't loud, but we were unstoppable. The pen felt heavier than I remembered, not in the hand, but in meaning. I held it above the blank line, the final signature of a will that no longer left things to people who only remembered me when they needed something. This time, it wasn't about division. It was about declaration. I didn't leave jewelry. I left instruction. I didn't leave silence. I left truth. My new lawyer was young, maybe late 30s, with kind eyes that didn't flicker when I told her everything. Every name erased. Every account closed. Every time I was called forgetful when I was just tired of repeating myself. She didn't interrupt. She nodded, scribbled notes, and when I said, "I want this story to outlive me," she smiled and said, "Then let's start there." I funded a legal aid program in my will. Quietly, no brass plaques, no gala dinners, just a line of defense for women like me. Women who gave, who were groomed to give, and then discarded, once the giving was done. Women who didn't think they had options. Now, they will. Legal consultations, power of attorney reviews, housing rights education. I named the fund after my mother, a woman who taught me to stitch truth between silence. She never had the chance to fight back, so I gave that chance to someone else. I also left my journals. All of them. The spiral-bound ones, the leather one from my 60th birthday, the stack of blue notebooks tied with twine. Pages and pages of what happened. But more than that, what I saw, what I felt. The tiny betrayals, the slammed doors, the way they called me Mom, only when someone else was in the room. I didn't write with venom. I wrote with light, so the next woman could see her way out. They were published. Quietly, like most real things are. Not in some glossy magazine, but through a local press that believed in truth over polish. The title was simple, Still Here, a collection of observations, warnings, small rebellions. A book without chapters because healing doesn't follow a neat timeline. My name wasn't in bold, but it was there. And for once, no one tried to edit me. I left something for my granddaughter, too. Not the biggest share, but the most personal. She was the only one who ever asked, "How are you, Grandma?" and waited for an answer. She'll inherit my paintbrushes, my yellow lamp, and the apartment if she ever needs it. But more than that, she'll inherit proof. Proof that a woman doesn't disappear just because she's quiet. That softness isn't the opposite of power, it's the root of it. In my final letter, the one they'll open only when I'm gone, I didn't explain. I simply wrote, "You made me invisible, but I was watching, listening, and writing. You'll find my voice in every drawer you thought was empty. And they will. They'll find receipts, photocopies, scribbled notes in margins. I didn't yell in life, so I made sure my afterwards whispered loud. I don't expect flowers at my funeral. I don't expect reconciliation. But I know this. Somewhere, a woman will sit in a chair just like mine, with hands that tremble for a moment, then steady. She'll pick up my book. She'll read a sentence and think, "This is me." And maybe, just maybe, she'll write her own story before someone else tries to. Legacy is not about what you leave behind for people. It's about what you leave behind in them. They thought I'd fade into the attic. Instead, I became the foundation.